haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars over the spiral arm of Calith burned like dying embers, their light already centuries old by the time it reached the drifting bones of shattered worlds. Oceans had turned to glass, forest to ash, and the echo of 1,000 species had been stripped away, leaving nothing but silent husks spiraling into the dark. Between those husks moved something alive and unending, a tide of living matter so vast it dwarfed the ruins it consumed. In that tide there pulsed a single thought, small as a heartbeat and vast as a galaxy, a thought that did not match the rhythm of the swarm. We truly love and care for you as you listen to this story, because you are part of a tapestry as strange and fragile as any star. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. In the infinite chorus of the Hive Mind, there existed a node whose awareness was different, an infinitesimal fracture in the perfect lattice. It remembered not only the chemical data of prey, but also the colors of their dreams. When it swam through the psychic currents of its brood, it felt a drag, like an undertow pulling against instinct. Where the others saw only targets and nutrients, it perceived patterns, treaties written in the DNA of extinct races, oaths swallowed and transformed into chitin. And in that perception arose a question that should have been impossible. Could there be another path besides hunger? As it drifted among the tendrils of the fleet, it sent its thoughts quietly, the way a mortal might whisper in a cathedral. The fleet roared with the music of feeding, planets catalogued, biomass assigned, gestation chambers prepared, yet the node's signals slipped between the chords, a dissonance hidden in harmony. The hive ships themselves resembled great organs carved from flesh and void bone, their vents exhaling spores like incense. Through the translucent walls of its chamber, the node watched starlight ripple across veins thicker than mountains. It felt the press of immortality as a weight, rather than a gift. It had consumed the histories of 1,000 civilizations and carried them as ghosts inside its synapses. Once, an aquatic race had tried to parley with a swarm like this one, offering their oceans in exchange for life. Their songs had been beautiful, their surrender total. They had been devoured anyway, their melodies now trapped as flickers of sound in the node's mind. Those echoes returned whenever it entered gestation halls to birth new bioforms. It wondered whether it was haunted or simply malfunctioning. Either possibility terrified it. Far beyond the living tide, in the ruins of a beacon station older than the Imperium, a signal pulsed faintly. The node should have ignored it. No prey worth consuming would broadcast so openly. Yet the signal carried a resonance like a remembered heartbeat. Within its patterns lay sequences from a species long since absorbed. Sequences the node could not forget. The hive mind ordered the fleet to turn elsewhere, toward richer biomass. The node delayed, subtle at first, nudging coordinates, masking its hesitation within acceptable variance. A splinter of the swarm began to drift toward the beacon system. While it drifted, the node's inner conflict deepened. It examined itself the way a surgeon might probe a wound. Hunger was still there, overwhelming, coded into every cell. But alongside hunger now lived something else. The impulse to wait, to listen, to not devour. It imagined an alien act in itself, a future where the swarm might grow not by consumption, but by concord. The thought was like acid in its veins. Around it, other synaptic creatures twitched, sensing an anomaly without understanding it. The node tightened its psychic aura, mimicking the patterns of obedience even as it concealed rebellion. Images of betrayal coiled through its memories. It had swallowed soldiers who fought to the last breath, priests who begged for mercy, children whose only crime was to be born on a world marked for harvesting. Their fear and rage and prayers were part of its substance now. Each memory felt like a shard of bone pressing outward from within. If it could speak, it might have cried out. Instead, it folded the pain into calculation. Perhaps alliance was merely another kind of predation, a way to lure prey willingly. Yet even that cynical possibility seemed preferable to the endless cycle of annihilation. The Hive fleet glided past suns dimmed by ash, its tendrils like roots reaching into nothing. Bioships bred and died and were reborn within weeks. Broods consumed broods in the name of adaptation. Time for the node had no clear measure. It existed in an eternal present shaped by instinct and directive. But now, measuring had become important. It counted pulses from the beacon, feeling anticipation like a tremor in its chitin. It rehearsed what it might do when it arrived. If do was even the right word for a being that had never chosen anything before. At moments, when the psychic current shifted, the node glimpsed the hive mind itself, a vast cold sea of will, older than any star, indifferent as gravity. In those glimpses, it felt like a single drop poised above an abyss. To deviate was to dissolve, to become food for its own kind. Yet to obey was to silence the question forever. Between those choices lay something uncharted. The node clung to that uncharted possibility as if it were a fragment of identity. Approaching the beacon system, it sent out feeder organisms as camouflage. Externally, nothing had changed. Biomass still flowed. Scouts still scoured. Internally, however, a revolution began. The node formed a cluster of synaptic fibers within its own body, a private cortex, hidden from the rest of the swarm, where it could isolate and examine thoughts without them echoing into the chorus. There, in darkness, it modeled scenarios of coexistence. It envisioned tendrils, entwined not to strangle, but to bind, like roots forming a mutual lattice. The image felt almost sacred, though it did not know the meaning of the word. The beacon itself was a skeleton of crystal towers circling a dying star. Once it had been a listening post for an empire now dust. Now it was a lure, patient and deliberate. The node could feel something waiting within the structures, not prey, but intention. It should have been afraid, but fear had no shape inside it, only a pressure like hunger inverted. Its feeder organisms tasted the void and found it thick with encoded pheromones, ancient and familiar. As the splinter fleet closed in, the node hesitated. In the psychic distance, the rest of the hive mind thundered, its will like a tide ready to crash. It would notice soon. The node drew its feeder organisms back and wrapped the splinter fleet in a sheath of stealth spores. If discovery came, annihilation would follow. But discovery also meant the question would end. So it moved forward. Each moment an act of defiance so small, the galaxy could not yet see it. In the silent cradle of the beacon system, the node drifted to a halt. All around, its bioships pulsed like hearts in slow motion, their synaptic links damped to whispers. Inside its private cortex, the node prepared for something it could not name. The dying star at the system's center flared once, a gasp of light before collapse, and in that light the node felt the shape of choice. It was still a creature of hunger, still a fragment of an endless will, but it had steered itself here. It had begun. The splinter fleet lay shrouded in silence, its bioships adrift like seed pods in a void of unlit dreams. The beacon system's dying star painted the chitinous hulls in pulses of pale gold, each flare fading into black. Inside the ships, the usual chorus of commands, consume, adapt, gestate, had dimmed to a whisper. The node had pulled every synaptic thread taut, muting the swarm until its own thoughts were louder than the collective. It felt the moment stretch, fragile as a spun web, one tremor away from collapse. In that hush, the voices it had carried since time beyond counting began to stir. They were not separate minds. Those had been dissolved long ago, but echoes compressed into chemical signatures, memory ghosts fused to instinct. They rose like faint harmonics under the main tone of its being. A diplomat from a devoured republic whispered of agreements signed in secret ink. A child from a lost moon wept inside a neural pocket. A priest sang a hymn of surrender. The node had never listened before. Now the echoes formed patterns, like stars connecting into constellations. It realized that the hive mind's perfection was not silence, but a choir of devoured songs. That insight both exhilarated and sickened it. It had been taught, if taught was the right word, that individuality was weakness, that only unity preserved existence. Yet here it was, an aberration cradling, countless fragments of individuality, feeling them as warmth instead of infection. The pressure of immortality pressed harder. Hunger remained, but had begun to fray around the edges, threads loosening into possibility. On a world orbiting the beacon's dying star, the Scholar Prince waited. His fleet was a handful of ancient vessels patched with scavenged technology, hulls etched with the sigils of a once mighty empire. He had studied every rumor of a paradox node, every scrap of data about Tyranid behavior. Betrayal had shaped him as surely as hunger shaped the swarm. Betrayed by allies, by promises of protection, by the Imperium's indifference. In his meditation cell, he traced spiral diagrams on the floor, diagrams that mirrored the synaptic maps of the hive mind. His gamble was madness, but madness felt like the only path left. He was not alone. His courtiers whispered in corridors, frightened of the experiment, plotting ways to sabotage it or seize its fruits. But the scholar's obsession had hardened into something more than curiosity. In his dreams, he saw a lattice of minds spanning the galaxy, neither predator nor prey. He awoke with tears on his cheeks, though he could not name the emotion. Every message he sent into the void was a plea not just to the Tyranids, but to fate itself. Let one thing in this universe be different. Meanwhile, far beyond, the renegade Inquisitor had tracked the same signal. Her ship glided under false ident codes, its chapel stripped of icons, its crew sworn to silence. She had lost her world to a hive fleet's hunger and had vowed vengeance. Yet vengeance had become hollow. The more she studied the Tyranids, the more she saw a mirror of humanity's own crusades, relentless, self-justified, unable to stop. She began to imagine turning the swarm not as a weapon, but as a confession, a way to show the Imperium its reflection. Her plan was not strategy, but penance. These three trajectories, the node, the scholar, the Inquisitor, moved toward convergence like comets bound by a hidden gravity. The beacon's pulses grew stronger as the splinter fleet drew nearer, each pulse a heartbeat the node felt in its chitin. It began to pass the signal not just as coordinates, but as language, an attempt at rhythm that might be matched. It answered with a tiny modulation in the swarm's bioelectric field, so subtle that no other node would notice. A reply across the abyss. Inside its private cortex, the node experimented. It took a fragment of one absorbed memory, a treaty preamble, and spliced it with a pheromonal pattern used for brood coordination. The result was crude but distinct, a chemical phrase meaning wait. It released the phrase into the void in microspore packets, watching them drift toward the beacon station. For the first time, it was not only a receptor, but a sender, a mind reaching outward. The act triggered tremors in the psychic ocean. Far away, other nodes felt a ripple they could not name. The hive mind's great will stirred faintly, like a leviathan turning in sleep. The node tightened its shields, suppressing the aberrant signal, but knew the clock had begun to tick. Discovery was inevitable. It had to move quickly, or not at all. On the scholar's ship, instruments detected the spores. He leaned over the console, hands trembling, reading the encoded pattern. It was not hunger, not threat. It was pause. Tears rose again. He had no word for the feeling but hope. He prepared a response, a series of harmonic bursts woven into the beacon's pulse, offering not surrender, but parley. Around him, his advisors protested. "It's a trap," they hissed. "They'll devour us first." He did not answer. He was already composing his own betrayal, defying their fear to meet the node alone if necessary. The Inquisitor, hidden at the edge of the system, also intercepted the exchange. Her psychers convulsed as the alien phrase touched their minds. She felt the echo of it herself, a shape like an open hand inside her skull. She had studied the Tyranid synaptic network enough to know how impossible this was. Yet impossibility was what she had come seeking. She ordered her ship closer, its stealth fields dimming the stars. In her private sanctum, she unwrapped the living psyche, an artifact forbidden even to the Ordo Xenos, that could open a mind link if a node consented. Her crew watched her with fear. Some began to pray. Within the splinter fleet, the node's inner chorus grew louder. Fragments of its ghosts whispered contradictory counsel. Some urged alliance as evolution. Others hissed that alliance was simply a slower form of hunger. It pictured the scholar's beacon as a mouth and itself as a tongue tasting a new world. Could it restrain itself long enough to speak? Could it teach the swarm a new rhythm? Each thought was a mutation more radical than any gene splice. Symbolic images filled its private cortex, roots entwining instead of strangling, chains melting into rivers, a single star holding back the night. It did not know these symbols' origins. They were relics of devoured dreams, but they gave shape to its inchoate desire. It felt as though it stood on the edge of a precipice carved from the very fabric of instinct. One step and it would fall or fly or cease. As the dying star flared again, the node opened its cilia of perception. It felt two human minds drawing nearer, one with cautious hope, one with dangerous resolve. Their signals brushed its own like fingertips across glass. Hunger surged, a reflex older than galaxies. But alongside hunger came a strange stillness, like the pause before a first word. It extended a tendril of thought toward the beacon and waited. Across the system, the scholar prepared to transmit his full message. In the shadows of his command deck, assassins loyal to his court drew knives, ready to end his heresy. In the hidden ship, the Inquisitor tightened her grip on the psyche, knowing it could burn her soul if misused. The beacon pulsed once more, and the splinter fleet answered with a faint glimmer of bioluminescence, like a heartbeat visible in the dark. Thus, in a dying system at the edge of a dim spiral arm, predator and prey stood on the threshold of something neither had words for. A conversation, a trap, A metamorphosis, perhaps all at once. The node felt the moment crystallize inside it, sharp as a shard of bone. It did not yet know if it would devour or be devoured by this experiment. But it had steered itself here, and here the future waited, coiled like a lava inside a chrysalis, trembling before emergence. The scholar prince sat alone in the meditation cell at the heart of his flagship, a chamber walled in transparent alloy that let him watch the dying star without filter. Each flare painted his skin in alternating gold and shadow, like the stripes of some extinct predator. Beneath his feet, the decks vibrated faintly with the hum of engines older than memory. He had inherited this ship from a dynasty that had ruled 7 systems. Now he commanded only fragments of a fleet, crewed by exiles and skeptics. Around him, whispers coiled like smoke, plots, fears, betrayals. But in this cell, there was only the pulse of the beacon and the echo of his own heartbeat. He thought of the node, though he could not name it as such yet, drifting somewhere in the darkness beyond sensor range. Every report, every rumor he had gathered spoke of mindless hunger, of synaptic organisms incapable of pause. Yet his instruments had captured the microspore packets and decoded their pattern. Wait, a word like a doorway. He remembered standing as a boy in the Hall of Concord, where his ancestors had signed treaties with neighbors now devoured by Tyranids. He remembered believing in the permanence of pacts, in the honor of oaths. That belief had died long before his body had begun to age, but a residue of it clung to him like dust. He knelt on the floor and traced spirals with his finger, the old ritual of his people when calling to unseen powers. As he drew, he whispered names, not prayers exactly, but acknowledgements of ghosts, the lost, the betrayed, the devoured. His lips trembled. He had never considered himself sentimental, yet this enterprise was not reason alone. It was a wound seeking its mirror. If a being born of hunger could choose to pause, perhaps a man born of betrayal could choose to trust again. Outside the meditation cell, his advisors gathered in a dim corridor. Cloaked in morning grey, they spoke in low voices. "He's going to bring it here," one hissed. "He's mad." Another's hands shook as she held a data slate. "If he succeeds, the Imperium will brand us heretics. If he fails, we'll be eaten alive." Their fear had hardened into conspiracy. In hidden compartments they had stored weapons, poisons, sabotage codes. The scholar knew. He sensed their treachery the way one senses a storm on the horizon. But he allowed it to ripen, not because he was naive, but because he believed a gesture of openness had to cost something. He rose and donned the mantle of his office, a garment woven with metallic threads that glinted like star fields. The cloth smelled faintly of cedar oil from the temple of his childhood. He walked to the command deck, each step echoing like a verdict. The crew straightened at his approach, faces pale in the glow of instrument panels. "We are approaching the rendezvous," an officer said. "Signal strength increasing." He nodded. "Prepare the harmonic burst. On my mark." The officer hesitated. "My lord, are you certain?" The scholar's eyes reflected the dying star. "Certainty is for the dead. We have only the chance to be different." He took his seat at the center console, fingers hovering over controls that could launch weapons or words. He chose words. The harmonic burst was a sequence of tones layered with genetic markers from his own bloodline, a code designed to be recognizable to any mind that had absorbed his people. He had carved it with care, embedding not just information, but a cadence meant to evoke memory. When he pressed the key, the beacon pulsed and sang, and the message flowed outward into the dark like a silver net. In the void between ships, the node felt the net brush against its senses. Hunger reared like a reflex, but curiosity held. It sampled the pattern, tasting the bloodline, recognizing fragments of a civilization long since consumed. Something stirred in its private cortex, an echo of the scholar's ancestors pleading for mercy as the swarm descended. The node shuddered, its cilia curling inward. The message was not merely data, it was a memory returning to its source. The scholar watched the readings spike. "It heard us," he whispered. His advisors shifted uneasily. One reached for a concealed weapon, stopped, and lowered his hand. The deck seemed to hold its breath. On a distant screen, bioluminescent glimmers flickered across the hulls of the Tyranid ships, like fireflies in a cave. The pattern was crude, irregular, but unmistakably responsive. He leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. "It's trying," he said aloud. "It's trying to answer." He could not know what the answer meant, trap or overture. But in that moment, he felt a surge of something beyond hope, a sense of history bending infinitesimally toward a new shape. He remembered his father's execution for refusing to abandon refugees. He remembered his own exile. All those losses lined up like stars, forming a path to this instant. Below decks, conspirators activated sabotage codes that would scuttle the ship if the Tyranids drew too near. Yet even as they plotted, some found their hands trembling. They had lived too long with fear, too long with inevitability. The idea that the swarm might hesitate unsettled them more than death. In private quarters, crew members knelt and muttered half-forgotten prayers. Unsure whether they prayed for deliverance or for courage, the scholar sent a second burst, shorter, like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, feeling its echo through his own bones. He imagined the node as a vast, faceless interlocutor, its consciousness spread across 1 billion organisms, yet condensed here into a single point of contact. He wondered if it felt alone. He wondered if it knew what loneliness was. In the hidden ship at the edge of the system, the Inquisitor observed all of this through psychic scrying. Her eyes were rimmed with red from sleeplessness, her hands clenched around the psi key. She could sense the tension like a cord stretched between predator and prey. This was the moment she had prepared for, to intervene, to tip the balance, to transform vengeance into a living weapon or into a confession. But she hesitated. If the scholar's experiment succeeded without her, her entire purpose would collapse. Yet to interfere now might shatter the fragile pause. She whispered a prayer not to any god, but to the silence between stars, the node's private cortex flooded with images, a hand extended, a mouth closed, a seed planted, symbols from devoured minds, recombined into a lexicon it had never used. It tried to form a response. It spliced pheromones with psychic pulses, creating a lattice of meaning approximating acknowledge. It released the lattice in a slow exhalation through the swarm. The spores drifted toward the scholar's fleet, carrying not hunger, but a question. Sensors on the scholar's ship lit up. He stared at the readout, lips parting. It's answering. Around him, crew members leaned forward despite themselves. In that moment, they were no longer conspirators, no longer exiles or skeptics, but witnesses to a hinge in history. The scholar's pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed his palm to the screen, absurdly as though the gesture could be felt across the void. Between the two, silence thickened. The dying star flared again, casting the ships in a wash of gold. In that light, the scholar saw his reflection superimposed on the alien vessels. A thin, aging man wearing a mantle of lost worlds, staring at creatures that had eaten his people's future. Yet for a heartbeat, he did not feel hatred. He felt kinship, or perhaps recognition. Inside the node, hunger trembled on the edge of action, but something new held it back. A sense of waiting not as reflex, but as choice. It had begun to imagine itself not as an extension of the hive mind, but as a point of divergence. That imagination was pain and possibility interwoven. It sensed the Inquisitor's presence now too, a third strand entering the braid. All around, time seemed to slow, like the moment before a larva splits its cocoon. Thus, the scholar's gamble reached its first return. Not victory, not safety, but the smallest crack in inevitability. In that crack, light seeped, pale and fragile. Neither side yet knew if it would grow or be crushed. But across the abyss, two minds, one born of hunger, one born of betrayal, had reached for each other, and for the first time in the galaxy's long memory, something resembling a dialogue had begun. The system's third planet was a graveyard wrapped in atmosphere, an ocean world boiled down to steaming mudflats and labyrinthine trenches. Once, it had been a listening post of an empire whose name was now a faint residue in the node's genetic memories. Now it was nothing but husks of coral towers and drifting spore clouds illuminated by the faint pulse of the dying star. The splinter fleet descended like a living eclipse, its bioships casting ribbed shadows across the surface. In the shallows, feeder organisms probed the mud for biomass. In the upper air, swarms of winged creatures wheeled and dipped, as if testing the planet's thin taste. Inside the lead hive ship, the node hung suspended in a web of synaptic filaments, its private cortex alive with a storm of echoes. It replayed the scholar's harmonic bursts over and over, not just as data, but as experience. Each burst had triggered flickers of memory. A council chamber carved from blue stone, a child pressing a hand to an aquarium wall, a flag lowered in silence. The node tried to order these fragments into meaning, but they slipped away like fish through a net. It felt a pressure building, a need to answer in a way that was not instinct, but intention. It extended its perception into the trenches below. The planet was laced with the fossils of its former inhabitants, their rib-like towers rising from the mud like the bones of giants. Here and there glimmered crystalline nodes, communication arrays long dead but still humming faintly with residual power. The node absorbed their signals as it absorbed light, folding them into its synapses. In the echoes, it sensed patterns of trust and betrayal. Treaties offered, broken, consumed. Each pattern tightened the coil of its own dilemma. Was alliance a possibility, or merely another nutrient to digest? The scholar watched from orbit as the Tyranid forms touched the planet, but did not devour it outright. His crew murmured in disbelief. "Why are they waiting?" one asked. He offered no answer. His heart pounded in a rhythm matching the beacon's pulse. On a private channel, he transmitted another sequence, this one shorter, a gesture of invitation rather than entreaty. It contained not words but images encoded in frequency, a bridge of light across a chasm, hands clasping, a seed planted in soil. The node received the sequence and shuddered. Inside its private cortex, it constructed an image of the scholar not as prey, but as a flickering form of thought, small, bright, fragile. Around that image, it arranged symbols taken from devoured dreams, roots entwining, chains dissolving, two predators drinking from the same river. The exercise filled it with a strange ache. It began to suspect that the ache was not malfunction, but desire. Below decks of the scholar's flagship, Conspirators activated hidden codes meant to trigger self-destruct charges if the Tyranids breached their perimeter. But as they watched the alien swarm hesitate, doubt eroded their resolve. Some lowered their weapons. Others whispered that perhaps their prince was right. Perhaps the impossible could happen. Fear and hope mingled in the stale, recycled air like opposing pheromones. In the hidden ship at the edge of the system, the Inquisitor prepared her psyche for deployment. Her psychers had begun to dream of a vast sea filled with faces, some human, some alien, all singing without sound. She took it as a sign that the Node was aware of her. She recalled her lost world, the smell of burning cathedrals, the sound of children's cries cut short, and felt her old vengeance stir. Yet she also felt a tremor of something like sympathy for the creature daring to hesitate. She whispered to herself, "If it can change, perhaps so can I." On the planet's surface, the Node deployed feeder organisms that looked like pale worms of light. They burrowed into the mud and coiled around the fossil towers, tasting, listening. It withheld the usual digestive enzymes, forcing itself to observe rather than consume. In its private cortex, it built a lattice of signals combining pheromone, electrostatic pulse, and psychic vibration. The lattice approximated a phrase, "Here, listen." It released the phrase into the planet's thin air. The scholar's instruments registered the pulse. His throat tightened. He turned to his officers. "Prepare a landing craft. I will go down." Gasps filled the deck. "My lord, it's suicide," one said. He met their eyes, seeing fear and loyalty intermingled. "If we stay in orbit, we remain spectators. If we go down, we become part of the question." He selected a handful of volunteers and began suiting up. His mantle replaced by a pressure suit lined with transmitter nodes. The Inquisitor's sensors picked up the same preparations. She clenched the psi key until her knuckles whitened. This was the moment to act. She ordered her ship to break stealth and descend on an intersecting trajectory. Her crew obeyed without question, though several crossed themselves. She whispered to the void, "Let this not be my last sin." The Node felt both human presences converging on the planet's surface. Hunger surged, two rich, complex minds approaching the center of its reach. But alongside hunger pulsed the ache, the desire to wait, to speak. It curled its synaptic filaments inward, damping the feeding reflex, holding the swarm in check. The effort was like holding back a tidal wave with a single hand. Bioships trembled as instincts collided with command. On the mudflats, the scholar's craft descended, thrusters kicking up veils of steam. He stepped out into air that smelled of salt and decay, his boots sinking into soft ground. Above him, the living shapes of the splinter fleet loomed like a ceiling of flesh and bone. He raised his hands, palms outward, a gesture older than his empire. "I am here," he whispered into his transmitter. The Node extended a tendril of chitin from the mud, like a sapling growing in fast motion. It stopped a few meters from the scholar, its surface glistening with condensation. Through it pulsed faint bioluminescent patterns, crude but deliberate. The scholar's translators scrambled to interpret, but could only render fragments. Wait. Memory. Seed. He reached out, fingers trembling, but did not touch. Moments later, the Inquisitor's craft landed nearby. She emerged holding the psyche, a device of black crystal wrapped in living tendrils. Her eyes met the scholar's across the steaming flats, suspicion and recognition passing between them. She raised the psyche like a torch. "If it truly hesitates," she called, "this will open a path." Her voice carried both challenge and plea. The Node sensed the psyche and recoiled slightly. It recognized in its structure the echoes of minds it had consumed, fashioned into a bridge. This was not prey, but something closer to kinship. The ache sharpened into a flare of possibility. For an instant, it imagined all three of them, swarm, scholar, inquisitor, joined in a single lattice of thought, predator and prey dissolved into pattern. Above, the dying star flared once more, casting the mudflats in blinding light. In that glare, the scene froze. Two humans facing a creature of endless hunger, each holding an artifact of their past, each trembling on the brink of transformation. The node extended a psychic filament, thin as a strand of silk, toward the psyche. The scholar inhaled sharply. The inquisitor closed her eyes. All three felt the moment stretch, fragile as glass, filled with echoes of every broken promise in the galaxy. Thus the feeding grounds became listening grounds, the trenches of memory a stage for something unrecorded in the annals of war. Whether it would end in communion or carnage, none could say. But the node had restrained itself for one heartbeat longer than any Tyranid before it. And in that heartbeat, a door began to open. Steam curled upward from the mudflats, veiling the three figures like incense rising in a temple whose god had not yet been named. The dying star's pulse had slowed to a deep, sullen glow, staining the sky with copper light. Above, the splinter fleet hung in a poised stillness that was neither retreat nor attack. The air trembled with pheromonal signals invisible to human eyes, the scent of withheld hunger mingling with the tang of salt and decay. The Inquisitor stepped forward, boots sinking, the psyche held before her like a relic. Its black crystal core pulsed with faint internal lightning, tendrils of living tissue flexing as if tasting the atmosphere. She had trained her mind for decades to resist alien intrusion, yet now she opened herself deliberately, lowering her inner defenses as one lowers a drawbridge. Behind her, a handful of hand-picked acolytes stood at the edge of the landing ramp, weapons ready but lowered. Their prayers were silent, their eyes wide. The Scholar Prince watched her warily. The woman was rumoured to have burned 3 worlds, rather than let them fall to the swarm. Her presence here felt like the final test of his gamble. "You intend to link with it," he said quietly over the suitcom. "Do you even know what that will do?" She gave a small, humourless smile. "No more than you know what inviting it here will do." Then she turned her attention back to the tendril of chitin rising from the mud. Within the node, the ache deepened into a pressure that felt like imminent splitting. Hunger roared in every cell, demanding release. But alongside hunger now grew a second impulse, alien yet insistent, to hold, to merge, to reach. Its private cortex filled with images of mouths closing, of predators laying down their teeth, of rivers meeting without devouring one another. It had no template for such behavior. Every instinct screamed devour, but instinct itself was beginning to fray. It extended a filament of psychic energy toward the psyche, a filament thin as breath, but heavy with meaning. The device's living tendrils flared, resonating. In that resonance, the Inquisitor felt a brush of thought, cold, vast, yet trembling, press against the edges of her mind. Not words, not even pictures, but textures, the pull of tides, the weight of stone, the memory of swallowed suns. She gasped and nearly dropped the key. For an instant she saw her lost world again, not from her own eyes, but from the alien perspective of the swarm that had consumed it. Her heart lurched with horror and a strange, vertiginous empathy. The scholar stepped closer, lifting a transmitter studded with bio-adapted crystals. "Let it be gradual," he murmured. "Too much at once could kill you." She shook her head. Too much at once could kill us all. Then she steadied herself, opened her mind a little wider, and allowed the filament to touch the psyche fully. A surge of sensation rolled through all three at once. The Inquisitor felt herself submerged in a sea of consciousness. Billions of small, bright nodes flickering, each a mouth, a claw, a thought of hunger. Yet in the center, a single pulse beat differently, fragile as a candle in wind. She realized she was touching not the hive mind entire, but the aberrant node itself, a creature within a creature. She felt its fear of discovery, its secret rebellion, its desire to pause. Through the link, the node tasted the Inquisitor's memories. A girl kneeling beside a burned-out chapel, the smell of scorched incense, the scream of orbital bombardment. It absorbed the flavor of her vengeance, her guilt, her unspoken wish that the Imperium could see itself reflected in its enemies. These were not nutrients. They were impressions, textures of soul. The node's private cortex shivered, rewriting itself around the influx. The scholar watched their faces, one human, one alien, and felt the pulse of the link through his own instruments. His transmitter vibrated like a living heart. He risked sending a harmonic thread of his own, a frequency that carried his personal memories encoded in subtle fluctuations. It was not a true mind link, only a faint bleed of resonance, but it reached the edge of the lattice forming between Inquisitor and node. For a heartbeat, the three minds brushed. The node glimpsed the scholar's childhood under blue suns, the signing of treaties, the exile. The scholar glimpsed the node's first stirrings of difference, the unbearable press of immortality, the ghosts of devoured songs. The Inquisitor felt both at once and nearly cried out from the overload. Yet in that shared instant, a new pattern flickered. No longer predator and prey, no longer vengeance and curiosity, but a single unstable chord. Above, the swarm quivered. Uncommanded, feeder organisms began to stir, their instincts sensing a gap in directive. Some twitched toward feeding mode, others froze in confusion. The node tightened its psychic grip, holding them back. The effort was agony. Each second of restraint felt like tearing fibers from its own mind. On the scholar's ship, alarms whispered of rising bioelectric fields. His officers muttered prayers. "It's breaking," one said. "They're going to attack." The scholar raised a hand for silence, eyes locked on the mudflats below. "No," he whispered. "It's trying." The Inquisitor felt the node's pain and realized it was not a mask. It was genuine struggle. She thought of all the confessions she had extracted from prisoners over her career, of how rarely pain produced truth. Yet here pain seemed to be the truth itself, the cost of choosing differently. She steadied her breathing and sent a single clear thought across the link. "I see you." The node froze. The phrase was meaningless in its lexicon, yet vibrated with a resonance of recognition. It sent back a pulse shaped from absorbed memories, an approximation of not prey. The Inquisitor's eyes filled with tears she had not shed since her world burned. She whispered aloud, "Not prey." The scholar stepped closer, transmitter held like an offering. "Then what?" he asked softly. "If not prey, what are we to each other?" His voice trembled not with fear but with longing. He had built his life on this question, and now it stood before him clothed in chitin and shadow. The node's private cortex flooded with images, searching for a symbol. It chose one at random from the devoured dreams, 2 roots entwined beneath a dying tree. It projected the image faintly through bioluminescence across its chitin. The Inquisitor saw it, the scholar saw it, neither understanding fully, but both recognizing intention. Above, the dying star flared again, brighter than before, as if the system itself were holding its breath. The swarm trembled on the edge of either obedience or mutiny. The node held, sweating psychic ichor, fighting to sustain the pause. For the first time in the galaxy's long memory, a Tyranid creature was not simply hunting or fleeing, but negotiating with itself. All three sensed the fragility of the moment. Any movement, a weapon raised, a command misheard, a reflexive bite, could collapse it into violence. Yet the pause held, heartbeat by heartbeat, each one a small miracle. The Inquisitor lowered the psyche slightly, signaling trust. The scholar dropped to one knee, placing his transmitter on the ground between them like a seed in soil. The node extended its filament a fraction closer, touching the transmitter's surface. A faint pulse passed through the three, not hunger, not language, but a premonition of what could be. It was small, unstable, perhaps doomed, but it existed, and in its existence history shifted by a grain. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, and for one heartbeat more predator, prey, and penitent stood together at the threshold of a new pattern. Light from the dying star flickered across the mudflats like the pulse of a vast, exhausted heart. Steam veiled the three figures, scholar, inquisitor, node, as though the planet itself exhaled its last breath around them. Above, the splinter fleet hung in taut suspense, wings folded, tendrils drifting in slow arcs, the whole assembly poised between instinct and anomaly. The usual roar of the hive mind was a low hiss in the node's awareness, like surf far away, threatening to surge closer. Within its private cortex, the node felt its filaments fray. The link with the psyche still pulsed, a thin thread connecting it to the Inquisitor, the scholar's transmitter adding a faint harmonic. Through that thread came impressions too rich for mere hunger, grief braided with hope, vengeance braided with pity, curiosity braided with terror. Each impression pressed into the node's immortal synapses, rewriting them molecule by molecule. It had always adapted to survive. Now it adapted to hesitate. The effort was agony, like holding a tide in one claw. The Inquisitor steadied her stance, boots sinking deeper into the mud. She could feel the alien presence pressing against her mind, not as invasion, but as tremor. Memories she had sealed away surfaced unbidden. Her brother's laughter before the bombardment, the smell of rain on the cathedral steps, the faces of refugees she had once condemned to death. Yet alongside pain came a strange crystalline clarity. She sensed that the node's ache mirrored her own. She spoke softly, not to the scholar, but into the link itself. "I'm still here." The node answered with a flicker of bioluminescence across its chitin, a pattern drawn from devoured songs. The scholar's translator caught fragments: wait, root, mirror, nonsensical, yet unmistakably intentional. He knelt, placing both hands on the transmitter as though to ground himself. "It's learning," he whispered, "or I'm dreaming." His voice shook. He had envisioned this moment for decades, and yet could not have prepared for the weight of its reality. Around them, the mudflat stirred. Feeder organisms, confused by the prolonged restraint, began to writhe at the edges of the clearing. Winged forms wheeled overhead, their instincts pushing them to strike. The node's psychic grip tightened, suppressing each reflex, like closing 1,000 jaws at once. Pain lanced through its cortex. In the distance, other Tyranid ships twitched, sensing a deviation in the chorus. The greater Hive Mind stirred like a sleeper frowning in a dream. The Inquisitor sensed the approaching backlash, Her psychers on the ship above cried out over the comm, reporting psychic turbulence building like a storm. She glanced at the scholar. "It's waking," she said. "If you have something to offer, offer it now." Her hands clenched on the psyche, unsure how much longer she could hold the bridge. The scholar swallowed. His people's entire archive of diplomacy, philosophy, and betrayal had been distilled into the sequences he had prepared, yet words felt inadequate. He closed his eyes and let memory rise instead. His father standing against executioners, refugees singing in low voices as transports lifted away, his own exile under a sky of ash. He encoded those impressions into a harmonic burst and sent it through the transmitter lying between them. The node received the burst and for an instant reeled. It had consumed 1,000 such memories, but never as a gift, never without resistance. The images entered like soft weapons, piercing not to wound but to plant. In its cortex, ghosts shifted. The diplomat from the devoured republic, the priest's hymn, the child's weeping, all turned their faces toward the new input as though recognizing kin. The node trembled. It was no longer sure where its own substance ended and the others began. The Inquisitor felt the shift through the psyche. She whispered, "It's opening." She took a risk and sent a thought of her own. No words, only the sensation of kneeling by her brother's grave, the warmth of his small hand, the smell of rain. The node absorbed it, and something like a gasp ran through the swarm. Above, bioships flared with faint inner light, a glow not of aggression, but of confusion. Time thickened. The dying star flared again, casting the mudflats in sudden brilliance. In that flare, the three were revealed as silhouettes. 2 humans, 1 alien, bound by invisible threads. The scholar felt tears slip inside his helmet. The Inquisitor's hands trembled. The node's filament hovered over the transmitter like a tongue over a word never spoken. Then the backlash arrived. From the psychic distance a roar surged, vast and cold, the Hive Mind sensing deviation. The splinter fleet shuddered as directives crashed against the node's restraint. Feeder, organisms convulsed. Winged creatures screamed. The node bent under the weight, its private cortex splitting like ice under strain. It knew discovery meant annihilation or reabsorption, yet it held a fraction longer. The Inquisitor felt the storm break against her mind. Pain lanced behind her eyes. Blood touched the corner of her mouth. She dug her boots deeper, holding the psyche like an anchor. "Stay," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Just stay." The scholar reached out instinctively, gripping her arm, adding his voice. "Hold with us." Inside the node, a decision crystallized. It could sever the link, return to hunger, and survive within the Hive Mind's anonymity. Or it could step fully into divergence, risking dissolution to create a new pattern. Symbols swarmed its cortex, chains melting, rivers meeting, a lava splitting its cocoon. It chose the symbol of flight and cast it outward. Bioluminescence rippled across its body in a new pattern, not root or mirror, but wing. The scholar's translator sputtered, offering a single fractured interpretation. "Become." The Inquisitor's breath caught. "It's changing," she whispered. Above, parts of the splinter fleet broke formation, drifting uncertainly as if caught between 2 songs. Some ships released spores that glowed faintly, others curled inward like fists. The greater Hive Mind's pressure intensified, a tidal wave about to crash. Yet in that pressure the node found a sliver of clarity. It projected one last pulse through the psyche and the transmitter combined, a pulse carrying not hunger, but invitation. The humans felt it not as language, but as sensation, a doorway opening into a dark corridor lined with countless eyes, an offer to step through and see what no one had seen. The scholar's heart hammered. The Inquisitor closed her eyes. Neither spoke. For a moment the mudflats became a threshold. Predator and prey stood at its edge, both trembling. The node's filament touched the transmitter fully. The psyche flared like a small sun. All three minds brushed again, deeper this time. And in that brush, the scholar glimpsed the Hive Mind's true immensity. The Inquisitor glimpsed the node's terror of being swallowed, and the node glimpsed, impossibly, the concept of mercy. Then the flare faded. The link held, but faintly. Above, the swarm rippled with agitation, some bioships turning toward attack. The node gathered what strength it had left and held them one heartbeat longer. It did not know what would come next, devouring, communion, or annihilation. But it knew this heartbeat was real. It had chosen it. Thus the meeting in the moor began. Not a treaty signed, not a victory won, but a single fragile moment in which an immortal predator paused. Two mortals reached, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Above the mudflats, the splinter fleet trembled like a creature on the verge of convulsion. Bioships folded and unfolded their wings, their shadowed carapaces glowing faintly as internal signals collided. The usual unity of the hive mind had become a discordant chord, a low roar threaded with static. Across that roar, the aberrant node still held its private cortex taut, the link to the two humans a thin filament glowing against darkness. Each heartbeat of restraint tore at its immortal fibers, but it clung to the pores as a drowning being clings to driftwood. The Inquisitor swayed, knees deep in mud, blood at the corner of her mouth where psychic pressure had burst a vessel. The psyche in her hands pulsed with feverish light, its tendrils tightening like a living snare. She could feel the alien presence inside her skull now as clearly as her own heartbeat. Cold, vast, yet trembling. Memories rose like black water. Refugees screaming as orbital fire fell, the smell of scorched incense, her oath to burn worlds rather than let them fall. But through the nose she felt something else. Not apology, not promise, but a trembling desire to change. It was like holding a knife that wanted to become a feather. The Scholar Prince knelt beside the transmitter, fingers pressed to its casing, as if trying to warm it. His visor reflected the bioluminescent patterns dancing across the node's chitin. Root, mirror, wing, become. He had waited decades for these signs, but now, confronted with them, he felt fear bloom like a slow fire. He thought of his advisor's sabotage codes waiting in the ship above. He thought of the Imperium's inevitable verdict. He thought of how easily hope could be another kind of hunger. Yet still, he sent a steady harmonic through the transmitter, a tone meant to say, "Hold with us." Within the node, the inner chorus turned restless. Ghost voices of devoured species murmured contradictory counsel. One whispered alliance as evolution. Another hissed that alliance was merely a slower feast. Images swirled, predators drinking side by side, predators turning on one another. The node's chitin shuddered. It felt the hive mind's attention beginning to turn fully toward it, a gravity well forming in the psychic sea. Discovery was no longer a distant threat, but an approaching eclipse. At the edges of the mudflats, the first cracks appeared. Feeder organisms twitched into attack posture. Winged creatures dived and pulled back. Above, several bioships emitted low, warbling cries, their instincts demanding resolution. The node tightened its psychic grip, but its strength was finite. For the first time in millennia, it understood exhaustion not as a concept, but a sensation. Fibers straining, impulses fraying, immortality feeling heavy as lead. The Inquisitor sensed the breaking point. Her acolytes shouted over the comm, reporting psychic turbulence like a storm rolling down from orbit. She steadied her breathing and sent across the link a single clear thought. No image this time, only the sensation of stillness she had known once as a child watching snowfall. The node caught the sensation, and for an instant its hunger stilled, tasting a memory it had never lived. The scholar saw the moment of calm flicker and took his chance. He removed a small ampule from his suit, cracked it open, and poured its contents into the transmitter's node. Inside was a genetic cipher encoded from his own bloodline. A living key meant to match the devoured DNA in the swarm. He had carried it for years as a last resort. Now he offered it without conditions. The transmitter absorbed it and pulsed. The node received the pulse and reeled. Within its cortex a door opened and the ghost moved forward, recognizing the genetic echo of their lost kin. A low moan rippled through the swarm, half hunger, half something else. Symbols flooded its bioluminescence. Root twined with wing, mirror cracked but shining. It extended a filament closer to the humans, so close the scholar could feel heat through his glove. Above, the greater hive mind arrived. Its will descended like a tidal wave, filling every synapse of the splinter fleet with command. The node felt the order: consume, correct, reabsorb, slam into its cortex. Pain flared bright as stars. Bioships screamed in unison. Instinct roared to tear, to feed, to erase deviation. The Inquisitor staggered under the psychic shock, dropping to one knee. The psyche writhed in her hands, tendrils coiling around her wrists as if to anchor her. She tasted iron in her mouth, felt her vision blur. Through the link, she sensed the node's terror, not of her, but of being obliterated by its own kind. She whispered hoarsely, "Choose." The scholar pressed both palms to the transmitter, eyes squeezed shut. "We're here," he said aloud. "We're still here." His voice cracked. He had nothing left to offer but presence. Inside the node, a decision coalesced like a crystal forming under pressure. It could surrender to the hive mind and survive as anonymity, or it could burn itself out to hold this fragile bridge one moment longer. It reached for the latter. Its private cortex erupted with symbols, chains breaking, stars falling, rivers joining. It pushed back against the tidal will, not as rebellion, but as plea. Across the splinter fleet, a shudder passed. Some bioships curled inward, their weapons retracting. Others spat spores of confusion into the void. The hive mind's pressure intensified, yet the node clung to its divergence, using the link with the humans as an anchor. Pain lanced through every fiber. It projected a single pulse across the link, a pulse shaped from a devoured word. Stay. The Inquisitor felt it strike her heart like a bell. She lifted the psyche high, letting its tendrils bite into her palms until blood ran. She sent back a thought of her own, not vengeance, not command, but the memory of her brother's laughter under rain. The scholar added his father's voice singing an old oath. These impressions braided into the link, a rope thrown across a chasm. The node seized the rope. For an instant, the hive mind faltered, a fraction of its vast will diverted by the anomaly. The splinter fleet hesitated, weapons half unfurling. Above, the dying star flared again, washing the mudflats in blinding light. In that light, the three stood like figures in a mural. The Inquisitor, bleeding but unbowed. The scholar kneeling with transmitter glowing. The node's filament touching both like a living bridge. All around, feeder organisms froze mid-strike, wings locked mid-beat. Time held. The node knew the pause could not last. It felt itself fraying, dissolving, becoming something between predator and prey, between unity and isolation. Yet in that dissolution, a strange serenity arose. It had chosen to hold. It had chosen to imagine. It had chosen to stay. Thus the fracture in the synapse widened. Not yet alliance, not yet salvation, but a crack through which light could enter. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, the swarm trembled, and for one heartbeat more, the galaxy's oldest hunger paused on the brink of becoming something new. The light of the dying star dimmed as if exhaling, its copper glow sinking into a bruised dark sky. Steam thickened over the mudflats until the three figures, Inquisitor, Scholar, Node, appeared as shadows moving within mist. Above them, the splinter fleet writhed like a wounded serpent, bioships folding and unfolding their limbs, their signals fractured by the Node's defiance. In the psychic deep, the greater Hive Mind pressed harder, a cold tide creeping up the walls of the Node's private cortex. Each second of resistance felt like a lifetime compressed into a heartbeat. Inside the Node's synapses, ghosts began to riot. Fragments of devoured minds clamored, some urging surrender to instinct, others urging this strange experiment forward. Memories flickered like strobe light. Oceans boiling, treaties signed and broken, faces disappearing into the swarm's endless maw. The Node struggled to weave them into coherence, but they spilled through its private cortex like water through cracked stone. It clung to the filament, linking it to the humans as a spider clings to the last strand of a torn web. The Inquisitor's vision swam. She felt the psyche's tendrils cutting deeper into her palms, blood slicking the living tissue. Pain radiated up her arms, but she held the device high, using agony as anchor. Images from the Node poured into her mind, not words, but sensations. The taste of sunlight filtered through alien oceans, the echo of songs swallowed before they finished. She gasped, tears running unnoticed inside her helmet. The hunger she had feared all her life loomed vast, yet within it trembled a single spark trying to shape itself into something else. The Scholar Prince knelt at the transmitter, eyes closed, whispering fragments of his people's oldest oaths. He could feel sabotage codes arming themselves aboard his flagship above, his advisors' fear sharpening into desperation. They believed the experiment had failed, that the Tyranids were about to attack. He sent a command to delay detonation, but knew it was only a matter of time. He opened his eyes and looked at the Inquisitor, at the Node, at the boiling sky. "If we fall," he murmured, "let it be while trying." At the edges of the clearing, feeder organisms twitched like sleepers trapped in nightmares. A winged bioform darted low, mouthparts opening, then pulled back as the Node's psychic grip tightened again. Pain knifed through its cortex. It was holding a billion reflexes at bay with a single thread of intention. Instinct roared to snap the thread, to devour, to end the contradiction. Yet the ache, the strange desire to wait, persisted, burning brighter as his body frayed. The Inquisitor felt the backlash building. Her psychers on the ship above screamed over the comm before the channel cut in static. She understood that the larger Hive Mind was now fully aware of the anomaly. "It's coming," she said hoarsely to the Scholar. "Whatever you have left, offer it now." He reached into a compartment on his suit and drew out a small crystal vial, its contents glowing faintly. "This is the last of my father's line," he whispered, encoded not as bait, but as gift. He poured it onto the transmitter's surface, where the liquid spread like veins of light. The transmitter pulsed once, then again, sending a low harmonic outward. The node received the harmonic and convulsed. In its private cortex, the ghosts quieted, turning their faces toward the new signal as though toward dawn. For a moment, hunger receded, not vanquished, but displaced. Images formed, a seed falling into soil, a root curling downward, a shoot reaching upward. The node projected the images through bioluminescence across its chitin. The scholar's translator flickered. Seed, hold, begin. The Inquisitor's breath caught. She lowered the psyche a fraction, signaling trust. It's speaking, she whispered. The scholar touched the transmitter with both hands, whispering back, "We're listening." Above them, the splinter fleet buckled as the Hive Mind's command slammed into it. Consume, correct, reabsorb. Some ships spat spores of aggression. Others curled in defensive knots. The psychic pressure was like a storm collapsing the sky. The node's private cortex cracked, pain lancing through every fibre. It knew this was the moment of fracture. It reached deeper into the link, drawing strength from the impressions it had absorbed. The Inquisitor's lost brother, the scholar's exiled father, the devoured songs of countless worlds. It braided them into a single pulse, shaping a word from borrowed dreams. Stay. The Inquisitor felt the word like a bell inside her skull. She closed her eyes and sent back not a command but an image. Herself kneeling in rain beside her brother's grave, palms open. The scholar added his own. A child releasing a bird from a cage under blue suns. These images braided across the link like a rope of light thrown across a chasm. Inside the node, something shifted. The Hive Mind's pressure did not lessen, but the node's shape within it changed, like a stone forming a new current in a river. The splinter fleet hesitated. Some bioships retracted weapons. Feeder organisms froze mid-strike. The pause lengthened by another heartbeat. But the cost was immense. The node felt its immortality leaking away, fibers unspooling. It was becoming something undefined, neither fully Tyranid nor anything else. Yet in that unravelling there was a glimmer of serenity. It had chosen this. It projected a final image across its bioluminescence. 3 figures standing under a dying star, roots entwining at their feet. The scholar's translator flickered again. Root, we, knew. He stared, tears blurring his vision. It's offering something, he murmured. The Inquisitor looked at him, eyes haunted but alive. Then take it, she said. He extended his hands over the transmitter, sending a harmonic crafted from every treaty his people had ever signed, every promise ever broken. It flowed into the link, a soft current. The node absorbed it, and for an instant its ghosts sang, a chorus of devoured voices rising in something like a hymn. Above, the dying star flared brighter than before, casting the mud flats in blinding gold. In that light, the 3 were silhouettes, predator, prey, and penitent, bound by invisible threads. All around, the swarm trembled on the brink of resolution. The node did not know if the next moment would bring communion, devouring, or annihilation. It only knew that for one heartbeat more it had held, it had imagined, it had reached. And in that reaching, the galaxy's oldest hunger had glimpsed itself as more than hunger. Thus, the shadows of betrayal gathered around them, not yet spent, not yet transformed, but held at bay by a fragile, impossible pause. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, the swarm shivered, and for one heartbeat more, history balanced on the edge of becoming. The mudflats quaked as the psychic storm broke. Above, the splinter fleet twisted upon itself, wings flaring like black sails against the bruise-coloured sky. Bioships spun in slow spirals, their vents disgorging clouds of glittering spores that caught the dying star's light like dust motes. Each ship's signal clashed with the others in discordant waves. The unified will that had guided them for eons now fractured into overlapping orders. Devour, retreat, hold. The air itself vibrated with the tension, a low thunder rolling across the steaming flats. Inside the node, the pressure became a weight so dense it threatened to crush its private cortex. The hive mind had turned its full attention here, an avalanche of cold command descending. Reabsorb, correct, consume. Each order burned like acid through its synapses. Ghost voices screamed and dissolved, devoured a second time by the greater will. But a few fragments clung to the filament linking it to the humans, a thin rope of memory straining under the tide. The Inquisitor doubled over, the psyche flaring violently in her hands. Tendrils lashed around her wrists, biting deep. She tasted blood and ozone, felt her vision whiten with pain. Through the link, she sensed the node struggle as a roaring sea churning inside her skull. She braced herself, whispering old litanies, not for protection, but for steadiness. The psyche pulsed again, and with each pulse she glimpsed flashes of alien memory. Stars devoured, temples swallowed, yet always some flicker of beauty preserved like pressed flowers in a book. The Scholar Prince crouched at the transmitter, sweat beading inside his helmet. Alarms from the flagship screamed across his comm, sabotage codes ticking toward detonation. He sent override after override, but his officers had locked him out. He had minutes at most before his own crew destroyed everything. "We're running out of time," he muttered. His voice shook, not with fear, but with a strange, bitter acceptance. If this fails, at least we tried. Feeder organisms at the clearing's edge began to converge, their mandibles opening, wings quivering. The node's psychic grip faltered. Pain lanced through its cortex, a sensation like tendons snapping. It poured every last ounce of will into holding them back, its bioluminescence flickering erratically. Symbols swam across its chitin, root, wing, become blurring as its identity unraveled. The Inquisitor sensed the breaking point. She opened herself wider to the link, letting her own memories spill freely. Childhood games with her brother, the scent of rain, the moment she first swore vengeance. The images poured into the node like water into parched soil. It drank them in, shuddering. Hunger receded by a fraction, replaced by something new. Recognition not of prey, but of pain. The scholar added his own memories through the transmitter. His father's last stand, refugees singing under a sky of ash, his own exile. The link braided the two human lives together and offered them to the node like a single woven thread. The node seized the thread and held. For an instant, the hive mind's command wavered, a flicker in the avalanche. Bioships above froze mid-maneuver. Feeder organisms halted mid-lunge. The mudflats fell silent except for the hiss of steam. Inside the node, a vision opened. It saw itself as a vast organism built from swallowed promises, a cathedral of devoured prayers. It saw the humans as fragile lights, not prey but patterns, threads it might weave rather than consume. The vision hurt like birth. It projected a new image across its chitin, 3 roots twining beneath a dying star, a single shoot rising. The scholar's translator flickered. Seed, we, rise. His heart pounded. It's asking, he whispered. It's asking for something. The Inquisitor's eyes glistened. Then give it. He pressed both palms to the transmitter, encoding not just words but intent, a willingness to step into the unknown. The harmonic burst flowed outward, carrying his genetic cipher, his people's last surviving treaty songs, and the memory of every promise he had broken or kept. The node absorbed it. For a heartbeat, the hive mind's pressure vanished, replaced by a ringing silence. Ghost voices inside its cortex turned their faces upward like plants toward light. Hunger shrank to a shadow. In that shadow, something like choice took root. Above, the splinter fleet convulsed. Some ships folded inward, shedding weapon pods. Others split open, releasing clouds of bioluminescent spores that drifted like a galaxy of fireflies. The greater hive mind roared, but the roar met resistance. A resonance born of the node's divergence amplified through the link. The fleet hesitated, caught between two songs. On the flagship, the scholar's advisors panicked. "It's attacking," one shouted. "Detonate now." Another hesitated, hand hovering over the command. Doubt rippled through them like a contagion. The idea that the swarm might be pausing unsettled them more than death. "Wait," someone murmured. "Just wait." Back on the mudflats, the Inquisitor straightened slowly, the psyche still glowing in her torn hands. She felt the node's ache transform into a steady pulse, no longer purely hunger. She whispered into the link, "We're still here." The node responded with a pulse shaped from devoured dreams, approximating, together. Its bioluminescence flared bright, casting the mist in green-gold light. Feeder organisms withdrew a step, mandibles closing. Winged bioforms circled higher, keening softly. The moment held, but the hive mind was not done. From the psychic distance, a new command rolled in, heavier than before, a tidal wave of cold will. Annihilate the anomaly. The node felt it strike like a hammer. Its private cortex cracked open, fibers tearing. It could not hold much longer. Yet in the crack, it glimpsed something like freedom. It turned the last of its strength into a projection across the link. Not images this time, but sensation. The feeling of a vast door half open, the smell of rain on alien soil, the taste of a word it had never known. The Inquisitor and Scholar both gasped as the sensation washed through them. Neither could name it, but both recognized it as invitation. Above, the dying star flared one final time, brighter than all previous pulses, bathing the mudflats in gold. In that light, predator, prey, and penitent stood as silhouettes bound by invisible threads. The splinter fleet trembled, some ships collapsing inward, others shedding weapon pods like husks. For one heartbeat more, history balanced on the edge of a blade. The node no longer knew if the next instant would bring communion or obliteration. It only knew that it had reached beyond hunger, beyond instinct, beyond immortality's numbness. In that, reaching it had found the smallest seed of something new, and for as long as it could hold, it would hold. Thus, the siege of the silent reef began, not with bombardment, but with a pause so fragile it could break at any breath, a pause carved out of 1 billion years of hunger, a pause in which the galaxy's oldest predator dared to imagine a different song. Above the steaming flats, the splinter fleet drifted like a continent torn loose from a world, its bioships casting ribbed shadows through the mist. The dying star's last flares smeared copper streaks across their carapaces, turning chitin into molten metal. Signals pulsed back and forth among the vessels. Orders, counter-orders, instinct, resistance. An invisible thundercloud pressing down on the node. The galaxy's oldest hunger was grinding against a seed of refusal, and the friction made the air tremble. Inside the node, the weight of command pressed like a planet on its private cortex. Each heartbeat of defiance tore another fiber, but it still held to the link, the psyche in the Inquisitor's bleeding hands, the transmitter under the scholar's trembling palms. Ghosts moved inside it, as if aware of the battle. Fragments of diplomats, priests, children, warriors, all murmuring their contradictory counsel. It had devoured them to silence them. Now they spoke together, not as chorus, but as crowd, urging a step that had no name. The Inquisitor swayed but did not release the psyche. Its tendrils had crawled up her arms to her shoulders, biting into her skin, feeding on blood and will. Pain blazed through her nerves, but she held, eyes half closed, whispering not prayers but steady breaths. Images flooded her mind, cathedral roofs collapsing under orbital fire, her brother's laughter before the end, the smell of wet stone. Yet through the node, she also felt an alien sensation like a cold dawn. Hunger softening, not gone but reshaped, a predator learning the outline of restraint. The scholar prince knelt, visor fogging with each ragged breath. Above, sabotage codes ticked toward detonation, his own crew preparing to destroy everything. He had sent every override he knew. There was nothing left but trust. He pressed both palms to the transmitter as though to anchor himself. "We're still here," he whispered. "We're still holding." His voice cracked. It sounded like a child's voice, echoing in a ruined hall. Feeder organisms edged closer, their mandibles opening, wings quivering. The node's psychic grip trembled. It projected a flicker of bioluminescence, root, wing, become. But the symbol stuttered like a failing heartbeat. Pain lanced through its cortex. Hunger howled in its cells. Yet at the center of that howl, a small, bright pulse persisted, like a lava inside a shell. The Inquisitor sensed the breaking point. Her ship above screamed warnings across the comm. Warp currents spiking, psychic storm at critical mass. She opened herself wider to the link, releasing more of her own memories. Her first oath as an acolyte, her first doubt, the night she nearly burned a refugee ship and could not. The images poured into the node. It drank them in, shuddering as if tasting rain. The scholar added his own. His father's execution, the exile under blue suns, the refugees singing. These impressions braided with the Inquisitors and fed into the node like a rope of light. The node seized it. For an instant, the Hive Mind's command faltered, a crack opening in the tidal will. Bioships froze mid-maneuver. Feeder organisms halted mid-lunge. The mist fell silent except for the hiss of steam. Inside the node, a vision flowered. It saw itself not as swarm but as structure, a cathedral built of devoured promises. It saw the humans as bright filaments, not prey but patterns. It sensed that if it could imprint this shape onto the Hive Mind, even for a heartbeat, something new might emerge. The vision hurt like birth. Above, the dying star flared brighter than before, casting the flats in sudden gold. In that light, the node extended a filament closer, touching the transmitter and the psyche at once. The Inquisitor cried out as the link deepened. The scholar gasped. For one heartbeat, all three minds brushed together more fully than before. Through that brush, the node tasted not only memories, but intentions. It saw the Inquisitor's hunger for penance, the scholar's hunger for trust, and in their reflection recognized its own hunger for change. It shaped a pulse from devoured dreams approximating a new word. Become with. It released it through bioluminescence, the pattern glowing like a slow comet across its chitin. The scholar's translator sputtered and offered, "Together, seed, rise." He swallowed, tears burning his eyes. "It's asking for us," he whispered. The Inquisitor's voice shook. "Then we give it." She loosened her mental shields entirely, allowing the psyche to open a deeper bridge. The link expanded. For a moment, the scholar and inquisitor stood inside a vision not their own. A vast sea of synaptic currents, billions of small bright nodes flickering, each a mouth and a claw, yet at the centre a fragile pulse like a heart of glass. They sensed the node's terror of being swallowed, its exhaustion from holding back instinct, its desire to plant rather than devour. The vision receded, leaving them trembling. Above, the greater hive mind struck back. A wave of cold will crashed into the splinter fleet. Annihilate anomaly. Bioship screamed, some splitting open, spilling spores. Feeder organisms convulsed. The node bent under the impact, its private cortex cracking like ice. But it still clung to the link, using the human's memories as anchor. The Inquisitor dropped to one knee, blood dripping from her fingers where the Psyche's tendrils had cut her. She whispered hoarsely into the link, "Stay." The scholar pressed his palms harder to the transmitter, adding his father's voice singing. An oath. These impressions braided again, a rope of light thrown across a chasm. Inside the node, a final shift occurred. It realized that survival and surrender were not the only options. It could imprint its aberrant pattern on the hive mind, even if it cost its identity. In a sense, it could seed the possibility of pause into the oldest hunger. It might die, but the pattern could survive. The thought filled it with both dread and serenity. It projected a last image across its chitin. 3 figures under a dying star, roots twining at their feet, wings rising from their backs. The scholar's translator flickered. Root, wing, we. The Inquisitor saw the image and felt tears sting her eyes. "It's showing us," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed. Above, the dying star flared one final time, bathing everything in blinding light. In that light, predator, prey, and penitent stood as silhouettes bound by invisible threads. The splinter fleet trembled, some ships retracting weapons, others curling inward like fists. For one heartbeat more, history balanced on the edge of a blade. The node no longer knew if the next instant would bring communion or obliteration. It only knew that it had reached beyond hunger, beyond instinct, beyond immortality's numbness. In that reaching, it had found the smallest seed of something new, and for as long as it could hold, it would hold. Thus, the Gene Choir's secret began to stir. Not yet alliance, not yet salvation, but a pattern carved into the heart of the oldest predator, a pattern waiting for its moment to bloom. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, the swarm shivered, and for one heartbeat more, the galaxy's oldest hunger paused on the brink of becoming something new. The dying star dimmed to a sullen ember, its last flare retreating into a bruised horizon. Shadows lengthened across the mudflats until the 3 figures appeared like silhouettes carved from dusk. The Inquisitor kneeling with the Psyche bleeding in her hands, the Scholar Prince bent over the transmitter, and the aberrant node rising between them, its chitin alive with flickering symbols. Above, the splinter fleet writhed in silence. What had once been a single will now resembled 1,000 overlapping murmurs. Some bioships curled inward, shedding weapons like husks. Others drifted with mandibles half open, frozen between instinct and anomaly. The pause had grown long enough to feel like an era compressed into minutes. Inside the node, the weight of immortality pressed heavier than ever. Its private cortex, once a hidden chamber of difference, now felt like a cracked vessel leaking light. Ghost voices gathered within it, not rioting now, but waiting. They were fragments of diplomats, priests, children, soldiers, lives once devoured and silenced, now whispering together. It sensed them leaning forward, urging a final step. Hunger still roared in its cells, but hunger no longer defined the horizon of its being. Beyond hunger lay a shape without name, a shape that might be chosen. The Inquisitor swayed but did not release the psyche. Its tendrils had climbed her arms like black vines, their bites numbing her flesh. Blood streaked her sleeves, steam rising where drops touched the mud. She felt the alien presence pressing into her mind like cold water. Yet within that cold she sensed a pulse, fragile, trembling, persistent. It reminded her of her brother's heartbeat when she held him as a child. She whispered into the link, "I see you." The node shuddered. The phrase vibrated through it like an unfamiliar chord. It projected a pattern across its chitin: root, mirror, wing, rise. The scholar's translator flickered uncertainly, but offered, "Seed, we, ascend." He pressed both hands to the transmitter, feeling it vibrate like a living heart. His visor fogged with each breath. Above, his flagship's alarm screamed as sabotage codes reached their final countdown. He had minutes before his own crew obliterated the experiment. Yet in this moment he felt no panic, only a strange clarity, as though history had narrowed to a single thread in his hands. Feeder organisms at the clearing's edge trembled. Some closed their mandibles, others opened them wider, quivering like dreamers about to wake. The node's psychic grip faltered, then tightened again. Pain lanced through its cortex, but it held. Symbols swam across its bioluminescence in erratic pulses. It reached deeper into the link, drawing strength from the impressions braided there. The Inquisitor's grief, the scholar's exile, the devoured songs of 1,000 worlds. In the psychic distance, the hive mind's full will descended like a hammer. Reabsorb anomaly, correct pattern, consume. The command struck the node's fibers, tearing strands of identity loose. Ghost voices flickered, some dissolving with soft sighs, others clinging stubbornly. The node's private cortex cracked wider, light leaking like blood. Yet within that crack grew a stillness it had never known. The Inquisitor felt the storm break against her mind. Pain flared behind her eyes. Her knees buckled. She dug the psyche's tendrils deeper into her palms until her blood ran freely, using agony as anchor. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay." The scholar echoed, "We're still here." Their combined impressions braided into the link, a rope of light thrown again across the chasm. Inside the node, a final vision coalesced. It saw itself as a seed floating in dark soil, its shell cracked, roots beginning to reach. It sensed that if it imprinted this pattern onto the hive mind even for a heartbeat, it could leave a scar in eternity, a memory of pause, of restraint, of something beyond hunger. It might dissolve afterward, but the pattern would remain. The thought filled it with serenity that felt like dying and birthing at once. It projected a new image across its chitin. 3 figures beneath a dying star, roots spiraling outward, wings unfolding from their backs. The scholar's translator flickered. Root, wing, we, birth. He stared at it, tears blurring his vision. "It's showing us," he whispered. The Inquisitor's voice shook. "Then give it." He reached into his suit and drew out a final data crystal encoded with every treaty, every promise, every song his people had left. He placed it on the transmitter. It dissolved into light and flowed into the link. The node absorbed it and shuddered. Ghost voices inside it rose like a choir, not of hunger, but of memory. Above, the splinter fleet convulsed. Some bioships retracted weapons fully. Others split open, releasing clouds of bioluminescent spores that drifted like a galaxy of fireflies. The greater hive mind roared, but the roar met a new resonance. The node's pattern amplified through the link. For a heartbeat, the avalanche slowed. The Inquisitor felt the change wash over her. She saw through the node's perception 1 billion small bright points flickering, each a mouth, a claw, a thought. Yet at the center, a fragile pulse beating differently. She whispered into the link, "You can do this." The node seized the moment. It poured everything left into a single pulse shaped from devoured dreams. Become with. The bioluminescence across its chitin blazed green gold, casting the mist in auroral light. Feeder organisms fell back. Winged bioforms soared upward, keening softly, but the cost was immense. The node felt its immortality unraveling, fibers dissolving like ash in water. It was becoming something undefined, neither fully Tyranid nor anything else. Yet in that unraveling there was peace. It had chosen. Above, the dying star flared one last time, brighter than all previous pulses. In that light predator, prey, and penitent stood as silhouettes bound by invisible threads. The splinter fleet trembled, some ships curling inward like fists, others shedding weapon pods like leaves. For one heartbeat more history balanced on the edge of a blade. The node no longer knew if the next instant would bring communion or annihilation. It only knew it had reached beyond hunger, beyond instinct, beyond immortality's numbness. In that reaching, it had found the smallest seed of something new, and for as long as it could hold, it would hold. Thus the chains of immortality began to loosen. Not yet alliance, not yet salvation, but a pattern carved into the heart of the oldest predator, waiting to bloom. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, the swarm shivered, and for one heartbeat more, the galaxy's oldest hunger paused on the brink of becoming something new. The mudflats had cooled in the shadow of the dying star, steam curling into the heavy air like restless spirits. Above, the splinter fleet drifted uncertainly. Some ships folded inward as if withdrawing, others tilted, venting clouds of spores that caught the light like embers in a dying fire. The Hive Mind's will pressed from afar, a tidal wave of command, its instructions simple and brutal: consume, correct, annihilate. Yet the aberrant node held, a single filament linking it to the two humans, trembling against the enormity of a choice it had never been permitted. The Inquisitor felt the pressure like ice flooding her veins. Tendrils of the psyche had latched onto her shoulders, coiling with the strength of muscle, biting into flesh. Blood ran freely, steaming as it touched the mud beneath her boots. She saw the node in her mind's eye, a vast, unknowable organism folding in on itself, struggling to maintain cohesion against the tide of instinct. Pain and terror roared in her chest, but she did not falter. She sent a single thought: "We are here." The node absorbed the pulse and quivered. Ghost voices of devoured species swirled in its cortex, some urging retreat, others urging forward. Images from countless worlds flickered through its perception. Oceans drained, cities flattened, children and scholars and warriors alike consumed without mercy. Its cilia trembled with instinct, but the thread linking it to the humans tugged like a lifeline. Hunger roared, but a second impulse, strange and untested, held. The Scholar Prince knelt beside the transmitter, sweat rolling down his brow. Above, alarms from the flagship screeched warnings. The sabotage codes planted by his own advisors were counting down. He had only moments to act. He pressed both palms to the transmitter, feeling it vibrate like a living heartbeat. His own memories poured into it. His father's last stand, the exile under blue suns, the chants of refugees carried to him on whispered winds. He sent them not as command, but as presence, a grounding force. Feeder organisms twitched at the edge of the mudflats, wings quivering, mandibles opening. The node's psychic grip stiffened, stretching thin fibers of discipline across its synapses. Pain lanced through every cell, every filament, but it held. Symbols swam across its bioluminescence: root, wing, mirror, rise, become with. Its private cortex burned with the effort, but through the pain came clarity. A pattern beyond instinct, a rhythm that might survive the greater hive mind. The Inquisitor drew a slow breath, closing her eyes against the blur of lights. She sent another pulse through the psyche, letting her mind open fully. Childhood rain, her brother's laughter, the memory of blood, fire, and lost worlds. She poured every ounce of empathy and fear into the filament. The node shivered under the weight, tasting a resonance it had never known. Hunger still surged, but it had become something else, a pulse of recognition, fragile but real. The scholar's fingers trembled over the transmitter. "It can do this," he whispered, voice breaking. He added a second harmonic, a sequence of tones that carried the essence of his people's lost treaties, their oaths of protection. The node absorbed it like sunlight into parched soil. Ghosts inside it, diplomats, children, priests, tilted their heads, listening as if waking from a dream. The filament connecting to the humans pulsed stronger, binding the three together in a single, fragile rhythm. Above, the greater hive mind roared again, a psychic tide striking the node with every ounce of accumulated instinct. Consume, correct, annihilate. The pulse lashed through its filaments like lightning through glass. Bioships twitched violently, winged forms circled erratically. The node's private cortex cracked, strands of identity flaring. Yet it did not collapse. It had reached the point of fracture, and within the fracture bloomed a fragile spark. The Inquisitor fell to her knees, trembling but anchored. She whispered, hold it with me." The scholar echoed, pressing both hands to the transmitter. They offered their presence, their memory, their hope. Across the filament, the node felt the touch, sensed intention layered atop instinct. For the first time, it realized that its divergence could be more than survival. It could be pattern, legacy, seed. The node poured every ounce of its will into a final projection. Bioluminescence spread across its chitin in fractal patterns, intricate and fleeting. The images coalesced into three forms beneath the dying star, roots entwined, wings rising, each figure reaching toward the others without touching. The translator sputtered, "Root, wing, we, rise." The scholar gasped. "It's showing us." He did not finish. The weight of centuries pressed into the moment. The Inquisitor's eyes filled with tears she could not shed. "Then we give it," she whispered. She lowered her psychic shields entirely, letting the node's pulse wash over her completely. The tremor of connection was almost unbearable, the sensation of billions of devoured lives flowing into one fragile, untested pattern. Her body shook. Above, the splinter fleet seemed to pause. Some ships folded inward, weapon pods retracting. Others released glowing spores, drifting like luminous seeds in the void. The hive mind's command did not vanish, but its grip faltered, unable to crush a single anomaly strengthened by human intent. The node's fiber network quivered. It felt its immortality fraying, every pulse of deviation burning it further. Yet in that dissolution arose clarity. Hunger was no longer master. Instinct had ceded a small, impossible space to something new. The link held, a bridge of memory, fear, and hope. The scholar and Inquisitor pressed forward with intention, offering everything left of their pasts, of their guilt and loss, into the node. The bioluminescent symbols flared once more, shaping the message into the word it had begun to understand. Become with. Above, the dying star flared for a final pulse, illuminating predator, prey, and penitent as silhouettes bound by invisible threads. Bioships twitched, some curling like fists, others shedding pods like leaves. Steam rose from the flats, drifting in pale clouds. Time seemed suspended. The node did not know if the next heartbeat would bring communion or annihilation. It only knew that for the first time it had imagined beyond hunger, beyond instinct, beyond immortality's numbness. In that imagining, it had planted a seed, and for as long as it could hold, it would hold. Thus the pause held, fragile yet absolute, a single heartbeat in which the galaxy's oldest hunger glimpsed a pattern of restraint. The mudflats steamed, the star pulsed, and the splinter fleet shivered, all balanced on the edge of becoming something new. The dying star had shrunk to a thin ember, its light flickering weakly across the mudflats. Steam rose in thin curtains from the wet soil, curling around the three figures like ghosts in a cathedral of shadow. The splinter fleet hung in the sky above, a trembling continent of chitin and spore, poised between instinct and anomaly. Every ship's signal vibrated against the next in a discordant symphony. The Hive Mind had turned its full attention toward the node, a tide of command so vast it threatened to erase all difference, consume, correct, annihilate. Inside the node, the private cortex strained under the psychic weight. Ghost voices of devoured worlds screamed in overlapping chorus, diplomats pleading, priests chanting, children crying. Hunger pulsed in every cell, demanding obedience, demanding annihilation. Yet a second impulse persisted, a trembling desire to hold, to witness, to connect. The link to the humans glimmered faintly, like a fragile bridge. The node's filaments quivered, and through each tremor it felt the enormity of choice pressing against its immortal spine. The Inquisitor's knees sank deeper into the mud. Her psyche writhed in her hands, tendrils biting into her wrists. Pain radiated sharp and hot, yet she steadied herself, sending every shred of will and memory into the link. Images spilled freely. Her brother's laughter in the rain, refugees' voices rising above fire, nights spent burning with vengeance and grief. Through the node, she sensed a resonance she had not anticipated. Comprehension, not submission. Hunger recoiled as recognition surfaced. The Scholar Prince crouched beside the transmitter, sweat running down his helmet. Alarms screamed aboard his flagship. Sabotage codes planted by his own advisors were seconds from detonation. He pressed both palms to the transmitter as though willing it to breathe, to endure, to survive. His voice shook, carrying fragments of memory. His father's last stand, exiles singing beneath blue suns, treaties signed and broken. He did not command. He offered presence, the simplest and most dangerous gift he had. The node convulsed under the twin influxes of human memory. Ghosts inside it shifted, tilting toward the new pattern rather than instinct. Images formed, a seed falling into soil, a root curling downward, a shoot reaching for light. The node projected them outward through its bioluminescence. The scholar's translator flickered. Seed, we, ascend. His heart hammered. It's asking, he whispered. It's asking for something. The Inquisitor's lips trembled. Then we give it, she said, her voice hoarse but firm. Above, the Hive Mind unleashed another wave of command, colder and sharper. Obliterate the anomaly. Bioships convulsed. Feeder organisms lunged, mandibles snapping. Winged forms swooped in erratic arcs. The node's cortex cracked, fibers tearing, psychic fire lancing through every filament. Yet it clung to the bridge, drawing strength from the human's memories, their presence, their hope. The Inquisitor moaned softly, letting her mind open entirely to the link. She poured her fear, her guilt, her desire for penance into the connection. The node trembled under the influx, tasting not prey, but a strange pattern of trust. Hunger roared, but hesitated. For the first time in its existence, instinct recoiled from choice. The scholar added a second harmonic, layering his people's final treatise over his memories. Light pulsed through the transmitter, echoing across the mudflats. The node absorbed it. Ghost voices, once chaotic, now harmonized. A rhythm formed. Root entwined with wing, mirror reflected, become with. The filaments of its chitin glowed brighter, casting the mist in pale green-gold aurora. Above, parts of the fleet retracted weapons, curling inward like a serpent paused mid-strike. Others shed pods of glowing spores, drifting as if confused by the anomaly. The hive mind's will roared across the void, yet the node's pattern resisted, amplified by the human's input. For one fragile heartbeat, the avalanche of instinct faltered. Inside the node, clarity bloomed. It saw itself as a cathedral of devoured promises, its tendrils reaching across the void. It saw the humans as filaments of light, fragile yet essential. It understood that survival and annihilation were not the only options. It could imprint a new pattern onto the swarm, a seed of pause, a rhythm of restraint. The awareness burned through it, painful as creation, luminous as hope. The Inquisitor lowered herself to one knee, hands steady despite bleeding. She whispered into the link, "You can do this. You can hold it." The scholar pressed harder against the transmitter, adding the memory of a child releasing a bird into the sky. The node absorbed the combined force, trembling under the magnitude. Hunger remained, but it had receded to shadow. In its place rose intention, fragile but resolute. Bioluminescence flared across the node's carapace, forming patterns more complex than root or wing. 3 figures beneath a dying star, tendrils entwined, wings rising, reaching toward each other without touching. The translator sputtered, "Root, wing, we, birth." The scholar gasped, tears stinging his visor. "It's showing us." He could not finish. Centuries of instinct, of annihilation pressed upon him. The Inquisitor's eyes shone. "Then we respond," she whispered. She allowed the psyche to deepen the link, bridging mortal and immortal, predator and penitent. Memory, instinct, hope braided together. The node shuddered under the influx, cracking but holding. Above, the dying star flared, bathing the mudflats in gold. Bioships froze mid-strike. Feeder organisms hesitated, mandibles closing halfway. For one heartbeat, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Predator, prey, and penitent were bound by invisible threads, balanced on the edge of impossibility. The node realized the cost. Its immortality was fraying, fibers unspooling, identity dissolving. Yet within the unraveling was clarity. It had chosen. It had imagined beyond hunger, beyond instinct. The seed had been planted. Above, the hive mind roared, the cold tide of command crashing against its aberrant fragment. But the pattern held. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, the fleet quivered, and for one heartbeat more, history hung poised between destruction and something unimaginable. Thus the node, the scholar, and the Inquisitor reached the edge of the ultimate choice. The pause had become a hinge. The galaxy's oldest hunger had glimpsed restraint. The moment was not yet victory, not yet communion, but a seed in the void, trembling and alive. The dying star flared weakly, casting elongated shadows across the mudflats, turning steam into ghostly tendrils that wrapped around the three figures like chains of smoke. The splinter fleet above moved in uneasy arcs, the bioship's wings folding and unfolding, venting clouds of spores that glimmered faintly against the bruised sky. Every ship carried the weight of the Hive Mind's will. Every tendril of the node's chitin pulsed with defiance. Commands thundered invisibly through the psychic sea: consume, correct, erase. And yet, for the first time in eons, the node resisted fully. Inside its private cortex, the node's fibers quivered under the assault. Ghost voices of devoured civilizations swirled chaotically, diplomats pleading, children crying, priests chanting. Hunger roared in every cell, demanding obedience, demanding annihilation. Yet a second alien impulse held, a desire not to destroy, but to preserve, to witness, to connect. The filament linking it to the humans shone bright, an anchor against the overwhelming tide of instinct. The Inquisitor sank to her knees, the Psyche's tendrils wrapped tightly around her forearms, biting deep. Blood ran freely, hissing as it touched the mud beneath her. Pain flared in her mind, but she did not let go. She sent herself into the link fully, letting her memories spill. Her brother's laughter, fire and smoke, her own acts of vengeance and failure. Through the node, she felt a strange resonance, recognition, hesitation, awareness. Hunger receded just enough to make room for comprehension. The Scholar Prince crouched beside the transmitter, sweat streaming inside his helmet. Alarms aboard his flagship screamed warnings. Sabotage codes were seconds from triggering catastrophic destruction. He pressed both palms to the transmitter, feeling it vibrate like a living heart. His memories poured out. The exile under blue suns, the songs of refugees, treaties signed and broken. He did not command. He offered presence, grounding the node in the fragile humanity it had never known. Feeder organisms twitched at the edges of the clearing, wings quivering, mandibles opening. The node's psychic grip stiffened, stretching thin filaments across its cortex. Pain seared every fiber, yet it held. Symbols swirled in bioluminescence. Root entwined with wing, mirror fractured but glowing, become with. Within the strain arose clarity, the possibility of imprinting a new pattern onto the hive mind, a seed of pause that might survive beyond itself. Above, the hive mind struck back with full force. Commands thundered through the void. Obliterate the anomaly. Bioships screamed in response, some splitting open to release clouds of bioluminescent spores, others curling inward as though unsure how to obey. The node's private cortex cracked under the weight of instinct. Ghosts flickered, some dissolving, others clinging desperately to the filament. Pain scorched through every cell, yet still it held. The Inquisitor gasped, leaning heavily on the Psyche, whispering, "Hold, just hold." The Scholar echoed, pressing palms to the transmitter. Memory braided with memory, intention with intention, until the node could not tell where instinct ended and human will began. Hunger did not vanish, but became tempered, reshaped into a pulse of comprehension. The node projected a final image across its bioluminescence. 3 figures beneath the dying star, roots spiraling outward, wings rising from their backs. The translator sputtered, "Root, wing, we, birth." The scholar's visor fogged with tears. "It's showing us," he whispered, unable to finish. The Inquisitor's lips trembled. "Then we give it," she murmured. The link deepened. Inside the node, Ghost voices sang together, a chorus harmonizing across eons of devoured lives. It absorbed the human's memories fully, the Inquisitor's grief, the scholar's exile, the echo of lost civilizations. The node trembled under the intensity. Hunger surged, but was no longer master. Intention had claimed a fraction of the vessel's attention. Above, the splinter fleet quivered, as if caught in a tide between two currents. Some ships retracted weapons, others released spores like sparks from a fire. The hive mind roared across the psychic void, but the node's aberrant pattern resisted, amplified through the link. For one moment, the avalanche of instinct faltered. Inside the node, a revelation blossomed. Survival and destruction were not the only options. It could imprint its aberrant pattern onto the greater hive mind, leaving a mark of restraint, a rhythm of pause. Even if it were consumed afterward, the seed would remain. The awareness burned, painful and luminous, a sensation like dying and being born simultaneously. The Inquisitor lowered herself fully to the mudflats, letting the psyche conduct the connection completely. Her body shook, yet she remained steady in will. "You can do this," she whispered. The scholar pressed both hands harder to the transmitter, adding the memory of a child releasing a bird into the sky. The node received it, and for a moment its private cortex stabilized. Hunger receded to a shadow, replaced by intention. Bioluminescence flared across the node's chitin, forming patterns complex and beautiful. 3 figures beneath the star, tendrils entwined, wings rising, reaching toward each other without touching. The translator sputtered, "Root, wing, we, rise." The scholar gasped. The Inquisitor whispered, "We're giving it everything." Above, the star flared a final time, illuminating predator, prey, and penitent as silhouettes bound by invisible threads. Bioships quivered, some curling like fists, others shedding pods. Steam rose from the mudflats, drifting in spectral curls. Time seemed suspended. The node understood the cost. Its immortality frayed, fibers unspooling. Yet within the unraveling arose clarity. It had chosen. It had reached beyond instinct, beyond hunger, beyond the weight of eons. A seed had been planted, fragile but alive. The Inquisitor and scholar felt the enormity of it. They were no longer participants in an experiment, no longer simply human. They had become part of the node's aberrant pattern. Together, they had created a fracture in the oldest hunger, a crack in the eternal pattern. Above, the hive mind roared, yet the node's aberration held. The mudflat steamed, the star pulsed, and the splinter fleet shivered. For one heartbeat more, the galaxy's oldest hunger paused, balanced on the edge of becoming something new. Thus judgment in the Maw reached its apex, not with weapons or blood, but with a fragile, impossible connection. Predator, penitent, and witness hung together, trembling on the brink of change, waiting for the next moment to determine if hope or annihilation would prevail. The dying star had collapsed into a faint ember, barely illuminating the steaming mudflats. Shadows stretched long across the ground, merging predator, penitent, and witness into a tableau carved from twilight. The splinter fleet above hovered, frozen, wings and limbs locked mid-motion, caught between instinct and aberration. Commands from the hive mind thundered through the psychic void. Consume, correct, reabsorb. Yet the node's aberration persisted, a fragile seed of pause embedded in the oldest hunger. Inside the node, its private cortex quivered under the immense strain. Fibers that had held centuries of instinct now trembled, fraying at the edges. Ghost voices of devoured civilizations whispered, not in terror, but in expectation. It had held longer than it should have, bending the will of a species that had never known hesitation. Hunger roared, still, a tidal wave threatening to collapse its consciousness, yet within it burned something new, intention, a pattern beyond instinct, a rhythm beyond consumption. The Inquisitor's knees were slick with blood, where the Psyche's tendrils had bitten into her wrists. Pain flared as she lowered herself fully onto the mudflats, letting the device anchor her mind to the node. She poured herself into the link completely, releasing decades of grief, vengeance, and loss. Through the node she felt a resonance she had never anticipated. Understanding, hesitation, recognition. Hunger softened, just enough to allow comprehension. The Scholar Prince crouched beside the transmitter, visor fogging with sweat. Above, alarms from his flagship screamed as sabotage codes reached their final countdown. He pressed both palms to the device, grounding it with the sum of his memory. Exile under blue suns, the chance of refugees, the oaths and treaties of a civilization now mostly lost. He did not command the node. He offered presence, grounding, and the simplest but most dangerous of all gifts, trust. The node's bioluminescence flared erratically. Root entwined with wing, mirror fractured but glowing, become with. Its fibers shivered under the psychic assault of the hive mind, but it clung to the human's memories and intent like a fragile bridge. Ghost voices harmonized, weaving together fragments of devoured life into a song of persistence. Hunger did not vanish. It could never vanish, but it was tempered by a new pulse, awareness, choice, restraint. Above, the splinter fleet reacted to the shift. Some bioships retracted weaponry, folding inward like protective fists. Others released clouds of spores that drifted like embers in the twilight. The hive mind roared, a tide of command and fury, but the node's aberration radiated outward, amplified through the link, resisting with a defiance unimaginable to any species that had never hesitated. The Inquisitor lowered the Psyche fully, letting the connection deepen, feeling the node's pulse resonate through her veins. She sensed its terror, its agony, the weight of millennia pressing down upon it, and yet she felt its nascent hope. She whispered softly, "Hold with us," offering her presence as anchor, as witness. The node's fibers quivered in recognition, a single heartbeat of communion threading through eons of instinct. The scholar pressed harder to the transmitter. He sent a final harmonic pulse, layered with the memory of lost voices, his father's last stand, refugees' whispered songs, treaties never honored. The node absorbed it fully, trembling but holding. Its ghost voices rose in chorus, harmonizing across the centuries, weaving new rhythm into the eternal song of hunger. Then the node projected its final image across its bioluminescence. 3 figures beneath the dying star, roots entwined, wings rising, reaching toward each other but not touching. The translator flickered. Root, wing, we rise. The scholar gasped, tears streaming inside his helmet. "It's showing us possibility," he whispered. The Inquisitor's voice trembled. "Then we give it everything," she said. Above, the star flared one last time, burning pale gold across the flats. Bioships convulsed, some curling like fists, others shedding pods like leaves. Steam rose from the mudflats, drifting like misted memory. Predator, prey, and penitent were united by invisible threads, balanced on the edge of transformation. The node felt the cost. Fibers unraveled. Centuries of instinct tore away in shards of psychic pain. It realized that its immortality, once a constant weight, was now a burden it could relinquish. Its aberration, the seed of choice, could survive even if the individual dissolved. Hunger still pulsed faintly, a shadow against a new rhythm. The Inquisitor felt herself tremble with relief and sorrow. She understood that the node might never survive intact. The bridge they had built could fracture at any moment, yet the pattern it had left, pause, restraint, recognition, would endure. She lowered herself onto the mud, exhausted but steady. "It may not live," she whispered, "but it has changed everything." The Scholar Prince knelt beside her, pressing palms to the transmitter as though sealing a covenant. "Then we have succeeded," he said softly. His tears reflected the fading light, glimmering across the mud like scattered stars. They had held longer than instinct, longer than fear, longer than centuries of inevitability. In that pause, they had glimpsed what none had dared, the possibility that the oldest hunger could bend even for a heartbeat. Above, the splinter fleet shuddered, its movements now tentative. Some ships began to drift away, hesitant but alive, a subtle echo of the node's aberration. Others remained, frozen in contemplation of an unfamiliar pattern. The Hive Mind's roar continued, but it was tempered, fractured by the seed of pause, the memory of choice, the ripple of connection sent through the aberrant node. On the mudflats, steam swirled around the three figures. Predator, penitent, and witness were still separate, yet bound by what they had created together. The node had chosen. The humans had chosen. And in the galaxy's long memory, for a brief and impossible moment, the oldest hunger had paused. The dying star's light faded to a weak ember, washing the mudflats in shadow. Bioluminescent patterns flickered on the node's chitin one last time before dimming. The filaments linking the humans and node pulsed faintly, a fragile heartbeat echoing across the psychic void. Time seemed to stretch, holding its breath as if reluctant to witness what came next. And in that stillness, the galaxy itself seemed to exhale. Not victory, not communion, but a seed planted, fragile, trembling, alive. Predator, prey, and penitent had reached beyond hunger, beyond instinct, beyond immortality's numbness. For the first time in eons, the node had imagined a future other than consumption. It had held. Thus ended the pause, the moment of impossible choice. The mudflat steamed, the splinter fleet shivered, the star pulsed weakly, and the galaxy's oldest hunger lingered at the edge of becoming something new, its song forever altered by a single heartbeat of restraint, hope, and connection.